It was in May of 2019 when reports broke surrounding one of the largest breaches of online privacy ever recorded. One of the largest social media apps in the world, known as Snapchat, was caught up in the middle of a scandal that had been reported by several of the most reputable news outlets out there, in which several of their employees were said to have abused their position to access their users' data and to spy on them. It was a normal Thursday, when just shy of 8:45 in the evening, Joseph Cox of Vice's tech department named Motherboard would release an article that would forevermore discredit Snapchat's reputation. And what Motherboard would find was damning, to say the least. They were able to obtain facts and statements from numerous former employees, one current employee, and a cache of internal company emails to discover that a few years before the report dropped, likely at some point in the early to mid-2010s, there were Snapchat workers that abused their power to access their users' personal information, such as their phone numbers, email addresses, saved snaps, and perhaps most worryingly of all, their location. It goes without saying that this was a huge violation of their users' privacy, but even more so for an app such as Snapchat, which had a huge draw of being the app of anonymity many years ago. Snaps would only be able to be seen for a few seconds and then would be permanently deleted into the void. Or at least, so people thought. The idea that these Snapchat employees would breach their own rules and violate their users' privacy should have been very concerning to many. But it was actually this app's unique selling point which would lead to this espionage later on. Because it doesn't take a genius to know that disappearing messages would be very useful for people intent on breaking the law, as we'll further delve into later in the video. Law enforcement worked with Snapchat to develop a tool named SnapLion, which worked to access users' data so that when requested, Snapchat could give it over to the police. SnapLion itself is a play on words in reference to law enforcement officer, or LEO, Leo, Lion. According to various sources, it was claimed that Snapchat's customer ops department as well as their security department had access to SnapLion, which reportedly held the keys to the kingdom, and whose existence wasn't known about to the public prior to this Vice article dropping. Now, I think it's important to mention that tools similar to SnapLion aren't inherently a bad thing. They're actually the industry standard and can be very helpful in law enforcement cases. They can oftentimes be the difference between a criminal being locked up and walking free. But when handled incorrectly, we have such incidents as we had here, when consumers' privacy has been clearly violated. Snapchat would come out to say that they took these sorts of matters very seriously and that anyone who violated their business conduct would be immediately fired. Though even having said that, Snapchat have since come out and said they're now not exclusively only using SnapLion in collaboration with law enforcement, is being more commonly used throughout the company, meaning that though in theory this should be used professionally, who actually knows if it will be in practice? This was just one of the many controversies and scandals that Snapchat have found itself caught up in over the past few years. But it's also one that perhaps hasn't been reported about as much as it should have been. This is clearly a huge violation of privacy, and when looking it up on YouTube, it's very hard to find videos about it. And it has to make you wonder, what else are they hiding? So in this video, over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to air Snapchat's dirty laundry from the past decade or so for the whole world to see. Dirty laundry such as the allegations against their billionaire CEO Evan Spiegel, who had previously been accused of racism by a former employee. The story here is that back in 2015, there was a man of the name Anthony Popliano who was temporarily employed by Snapchat for a total of 3 weeks, during which time he claims that the CEO stated that he didn't want the app to expand into what he called poorer countries such as India and Spain. These allegations broke in April of 2017 and were promptly and entirely ignored by the Spanish. They didn't care whatsoever. But over in India, it was a bit of a different story. By the time this story broke, Snapchat had over 4 million active users within India, many of whom, upon finding out this new story, boycotted the app, deleted it, and spread the accusations around. But it could be argued that they might have been a bit too hasty to do this, because Snapchat would immediately clap back at this and say that the accusations were entirely ridiculous. And it also needs to be said that the person who originally made these claims, Anthony Popliano, would later take Snapchat to court in a case that was immediately thrown out by the judge. To say that he only worked there for 3 weeks, that he had clearly a bad reputation with the company, and that he was the only person since to claim that Spiegel said these sorts of things was peculiar to say the least. I really don't know if he's the most reliable source to come out with this stuff. On top of that, back in the mid-2010s, the world was made aware of the large online market that India could dominate, because it would only be a few years later, in 2018, that T-Series, an Indian brand, would become the most subscribed YouTube channel in the world. These sorts of trends would be seen way in advance by social media experts, so it would really make no sense to say these sorts of things about such a large and upcoming market. But having said that, not I, nor you, nor any journalist in the world can say for certain what happens behind the closed doors of Snapchat's headquarters. So there is a chance that Mr. Spiegel did in fact say those things. But from one Asian-based controversy to another, our next story is going to be very controversial. If you're new to this channel, we like to respectfully talk about dicey and controversial topics here. But just a fair warning, that's exactly what we're going to do now, because in August of 2016, Snapchat was accused of adding a filter that's been described as yellowface. Just in case you don't know what yellowface is, it's essentially the Asian equivalent of blackface. And that summer, Snapchat came under intense scrutiny for adding a filter which many people think has exaggerated racist Asian features, such as slanted eyes. Now, Snapchat responded to this by saying that this was meant to be an anime-inspired filter, it was just meant to look like you're an anime character. Obviously, anime is of Japanese origin, it's a Japanese art style, and throughout anime, there have been a number of famous characters whose eyes are similar to this filter. So whether this was intentionally, or maybe even unintentionally racist, or whether people were just making a mountain out of a molehill, that's for you to decide. But this wasn't the first time that people have deemed a Snapchat filter to be racist. There have been claims for years now that filters cater to white beauty standards because most of them seem to lighten the skin tone, which is especially disastrous for me and the rest of the pale gang because I look like Casper the pasty white ghost in half of my Snapchat pics. But there was also criticism held against it for the Bob Marley filter on 420, with many people saying that the reggae legend was just being seen as nothing more than a weed mascot, and some people even thought that it was blackface. I haven't really used Snapchat too much recently, but I definitely used it back then, and I remember that filters came and went extremely quickly. They'd kind of be there for a week and then they would just go, and that was the case for this Asian anime-inspired filter. The so-called yellowface filter left the app just as quickly as it came on to offend people, never to return again because of the uproar. But what do you think? Were these filters actually racist, or do you think it was just a bit more of light-hearted fun that was taken way out of context? But in the past, Snapchat filters haven't just come under fire because of their potential racism. Believe it or not, they've actually come under scrutiny because some people think that they could be deadly. Like it or not, there have been instances in the past where people's lives have almost been the forfeit of a Snapchat filter. And I'm thinking of one in particular. Of course, it is the speed measuring filter, which has actually been recently banned by the platform. And this is why. If you've used Snapchat in the past, you might be familiar with it, but just in case you're not, Snapchat back in the day added a bunch of filters that would track a bunch of stuff. You could tag your location, the day of the week, the time, the temperature, as well as what speed you were going at. The idea of this was that if you were in a plane and traveling at hundreds of miles an hour, for instance, that would be quite a cool snap to send to your friends. But some people would take this love of social media a bit too far. For example, back in 2016, there was a then 18-year-old named Crystal McGee who was behind the wheel of a Mercedes and tried to go 100 miles an hour to post it on Snapchat. She lost control of her car though and crashed into another vehicle owned by a man named Maynard Wentworth, who was an Uber driver just beginning his shift. He would subsequently spend 5 weeks in the ICU and suffered injuries that left him unable to work. The road this incident occurred on only had a speed limit of 55 miles an hour, but based on crash reenactments, it's thought that McGee could have been going upwards of 107 miles an hour with passengers in her car. Wentworth would take both Snapchat and McGee to court, but the judge ruled that Snapchat would be granted immunity and wouldn't be held responsible for what McGee was doing. And what she was doing was, in my opinion, one of the most idiotic things I have ever heard. She almost killed a man to try and get some arbitrary social media points. What the fuck? But it might have given me one of my favourite pictures on the internet ever. Let me clarify that I don't know if this is 100% real, but based on a bunch of articles that I've read about the situation, I keep seeing this one image, which appears to be McGee taking a selfie in a stretcher. And if we're talking about health concerns, allow me to point you in the direction of a new medical term, I guess, called Snapchat dysmorphia. Though it's hard to believe, this is a new term that's been reported on by Everyday Health, The Guardian, and Healthline. And you might be wondering, what is Snapchat dysmorphia? And I'll tell you. So this is a term coined in the past 5 years or so by cosmetic doctor Tijon Esho, and it refers to people who insistently fixate on their real life physical appearance compared to what they look like on a Snapchat filter. But obviously it doesn't just have to be a Snapchat filter, this applies to any sort of social media filter. The problem that many people have grown up accustomed to is that these filters are blurring the lines between what's real and what's fake. Your real face looks similar to these filters, but you're not the same. Your skin isn't as clear, your eyes aren't as well shaped, your eyebrows aren't quite as full, and so people are comparing their real faces to these fake, filtered, airbrushed and photoshopped versions of themselves and feeling really bad about it afterwards. Now, it's important to mention that this is not a medical diagnosis in the slightest, it's just a phrase that's risen in popularity over the past 5 or so years. But there have been a lot of plastic surgeons that have had patients come in and said the reason that they want to get their plastic surgery is because they don't feel comfortable in their own skin, their own body, because of these filters on social media. And that's really, really sad. There's an entire list of supposed symptoms and whatnot, but the most common ones are that you think that no picture of yourself is ever right, you always want to change something, that posting and taking selfies will cause you anxiety, and that you compare yourself against the impossible to obtain airbrushed versions of yourself. Let me say that for as bizarre as this is, and for as much as people will laugh at you because you've given yourself a complex because of social media, you are enough. Just the way you are. You do not need to look like those filters, because I'll tell you what, a lot of them are just straight up clapped. No matter what you look like, you're enough. But you also need to take responsibility and distance yourself from social media because it clearly is not healthy for you. I think that Snapchat, more than most social media platforms, have had people in the past develop really unhealthy relationships towards it, and I think that one of these symptoms is obsessively stalking people on Snapmaps. Because yeah, this is just a thing right now and nobody seems to bat an eye about it, so let's discuss. It's going on 6 years now that Snapmaps dropped, and I still remember that when it came out, I would have been right at the proper age demographic to be really hooked on Snapchat, and according to my cringe-ass memories at the time, yeah, I was. But I definitely remember going to school right after it released and talking to people who really felt like their privacy had been invaded. If you don't know what Snapmaps is, it's essentially this opt-in thing where when you open Snapchat up, you can click on this button so you can see where all of your friends are the last time they had Snapchat open. Which I'm sure has never caused any problems in friendships or relationships ever. Yeah, I mean, using Snapmaps isn't necessary in the slightest, but it's still weird that this is a thing. I looked up online how people reacted to the update when it dropped, and they seemed to share the same sentiment. They thought it was a bit creepy that if you've got it turned on, you would just be susceptible to stalking. And once again, this is a reality that we've just since accepted, that literally anyone on our friends list could know exactly where we are at any given moment as long as we've had Snapchat open. But having said that, I'll probably just keep mine on. I've had mine on for the past 6 years. I've got really nothing to hide. I'm not a cheater. I'm not living a second life. I usually don't blow off plans with friends, so mine's just gonna stay on. It can of course come in handy sometimes. For example, if someone's been abducted or they go missing and they've had their Snapchat open, you can trace them, you can track them, you can find them. So what do you think? Was this a good thing? I'm really not too sure. But I am sure that back in March of 2018, Snapchat fell into some really hot water after being accused of making a joke out of domestic violence. The year was 2009, and Rihanna was meant to play at the Grammys, but her performance was abruptly cancelled after reports surfaced that her then boyfriend Chris Brown had physically assaulted her. Long story short, Chris Brown would plead guilty to the charges and was given 5 years of probation, as well as being legally required to stay at least 50 yards or 46 meters away from Rihanna. This was huge news at the time, but it's only natural that in the years since then, it's become more and more of a distant memory. It gets spoken about less and less, but in March 2018, people's attention would once again be drawn to the sad event, as Snapchat would launch a new ad campaign, which was sort of a would you rather style of game. The point of the controversy comes in though when you see that one of the would you rathers were punch Chris Brown or slap Rihanna, which was immediately jumped on by her fans and the media because it seemed very insensitive to domestic abuse victims. Rihanna took to Snapchat's rival platform Instagram to announce her disgust for the campaign, leading to a disastrous loss of revenue for Snapchat. Shares in the company dropped 5% overnight, and it was later estimated that in total, the company lost $1 billion in value. Many Rihanna fans, as well as people who suffered from domestic violence, boycotted the app in the fallout of this. In response to this, Snapchat claimed that it was a mistake that this ad ever ran in the first place, claiming that it violated their own guidelines, and adding an apology to Rihanna. This severely hurt the company's image, and though Snapchat claimed it was a mistake, it led many people to wonder how it was even greenlit in the first place. And while we're talking about green, it's no secret that Snapchat has been in the centre of drug deals for a long time now. Or maybe it is a secret to you. Either way, I don't want to be a snitch, so if you're a law enforcement officer, please click off this video now. But yeah, this is one of the most popular apps that people contact their dealers on because of the anonymity of it. Messages disappear, so unlike Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp, it's harder to trace who's bought what. This isn't to say that people don't contact their dealers through other apps, but Snapchat is one of, if not the main social media platform for this. But it might not be for too much longer, because over the past few years, Snapchat has kind of built up a reputation for this. Most people that I know that use Snapchat frequently do it for hookups or drugs. But in 2022, the app was under the microscope because it appears as though more and more teenagers especially are using the app to purchase illegal substances. Believe it or not, I don't do drugs at all, and I'm not just saying that because my family watches these videos sometimes. I was raised right, they don't really interest me whatsoever, so it would be a bit crap if I tried to explain this, so I found an article published by NBC. It was written by Olivia Solon in October 2021, and it seems to have a better grasp on the situation than I could ever tell you, so we're just going to read off that. It reads, counterfeit prescription pills that look like legitimate medications such as Percocet, OxyContin, and Xanax, but actually contain a dose of potent synthetic opioid fentanyl have been linked to a wave of deaths in the United States over the last few years. And 2 in 5 of those tested in the United States contain enough fentanyl to kill. It went on to say that Snapchat have increased their detection tools for this kind of stuff, leading to a 112% increase in accounts being banned from the platform in the first half of 2021. If users search up fentanyl in the Snapchat search bar, they'll receive a PSA on the dangers of drugs. But unfortunately, this doesn't seem to have made too much of an impact because even as recently as last week, Fox News reported a further 8 fentanyl-related deaths spread across 6 states from pills purchased on Snapchat. Tragically, each of these people were aged between 15 and 22 and had their entire lives cut short. Snapchat themselves will come out and say that there was still a lot of action left to be taken, and based off that, they're not wrong. There's still a lot more to be done, because young people especially are still dying. But because this is such a large part of Snapchat, I want to take the time to delve into a single story in particular and shift the focus from the people that are consuming these substances to the people that are dealing them. And for that, I want to introduce you to the UK drug Queenpin, Henna Ashraf. That's right, ladies and gents, we're not talking about a drug kingpin for this next story, but instead a queenpin. Because it's 2023, everyone knows that women can run drug empires just as well as a man can. Don't forget it. It was such a big achievement in women's rights. Sorry. Anyway, she was caught by the police. Now, I'm not sure if this had anything to do with her capture, but it definitely helped convict her because she was said to brag a lot about what she was doing on Snapchat, reportedly having broadcast getting a £500 haircut in an upmarket salon in Knightsbridge, which is an upscale area bordering Hyde Park in London, which has surely got to be a red flag in itself. Like, I don't know how much women usually pay for a haircut, but anything more than like £100 has surely got to be paid with blood money, right? But anyways, I'm getting off track. She also posted pictures of her new flashy Mercedes on Snapchat too, and she'd send messages to people she knew on the app, flaunting her drug empire and wealth. It was in her Mercedes though, where her empire would turn to rubble as the police pulled her over on the M5 near Junction 24. She allegedly threw an object believed to be Class A drugs out the window, and the police also discovered a broken Nokia phone wedged between the seats. But despite her best efforts to cover her tracks, the police would soon build a case against her, and she was put behind bars for 3.5 years. And for this next story, we're turning the clock back 10 years, because although today, Snapchat really isn't known as an easy target for hackers, a decade ago, the same thing couldn't be said. You see, at the very end of 2013, it was reported by major news outlets that hackers had breached Snapchat and downloaded the usernames, general location, as well as the emails attached to them of 4.6 million users. This was only 2 years after the social media app launched, and it was starting to get very popular around this point, so it was a really bad look for them. These hackers would post the usernames on a since taken down website, blurring out the ends of the phone numbers and usernames, which claimed to have collected information on just over 4.6 million people located in 76 different area codes. But the real kicker of this was that Snapchat had a fair amount of prior warning before these events unfolded, as there was an Australian firm named Gibson Security which publicly warned Snapchat that it had some vulnerabilities in its app which could be easily exploited by hackers. The platform seemed disinterested in this warning, but would eventually pay the price. Gibson Security had warned Snapchat about these weaknesses 4 months prior to the hacking, but since no action was taken, they were essentially sitting ducks. And this hacking would, for a time, damage their reputation in the eyes of many. Especially with Snapchat being the app of privacy, people wondered if hackers could get these details, what else could they intercept? And that very question would be answered months later after hackers posted nearly 100,000 explicit images to the internet that were thought to have been taken on the app. And so the platform just had to undertake new measures to protect their users. These days, Snapchat is thought to be much more secure, with many of the ex-employees in the first story I told you guys giving it fair dues and saying that the app security is quite tight. So unless it gets hacked in the future and this part of the video ages horrendously, people seem to be much more confident in the app security these days. But the way had to be paved by mistakes first and foremost. And I think it would be a mistake for you if you didn't hit the big red subscribe button if you enjoyed my content. And if you're down there, why not give this video a like and follow me on Twitter and Instagram, both linked in my description. Apart from that, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.